I sold every property I owned, and I still have a real estate business. Right now, today, I own 0 doors, not one. And I'm about to try to build a business that controls 30 rental units across multiple cities without spending a single dollar of my own money to buy any of them. A few weeks ago, I closed on the sale of my last 3 properties. Corporate housing on those units had already beaten Airbnb on every number that mattered last season, and selling them freed up real cash, more than I had ever held at once in one place. My first instinct, the old instinct, was to take that money and go buy something bigger. A 4th property, maybe a 5th, financed with a bigger down payment this time around. But the more I sat with my own numbers from last season, the more uncomfortable that plan started to feel. Because when I actually broke down where the profit truly came from, it never came from owning the dirt underneath the building. It came from controlling a contract on a property, furnishing it properly, and renting it out to companies at 2 to 3 times the going residential rate. The building itself was never the asset that made the money. The agreement was. So instead of buying anything at all, I decided to test something that honestly scared me a little. Can I build that exact same kind of income at a much bigger scale while owning absolutely nothing? This season, I'm going to show you exactly how that works, step by step, with real numbers at every stage. The specific type of agreement that lets you control a property you do not own. How I'm picking which cities to expand into without ever getting on a plane to visit them in person. How I'm funding 10 units without touching my own savings account at all. And what happens when a client dispute threatens to take out almost $20,000 of monthly income in a single week. Let's see the specific numbers that pushed me toward this. Across my 3 owned properties last season, I tested 3 different models. The most conservative one netted around $600 per door after every expense. My best performing model, full corporate housing, netted closer to $1,125 per door per month. Not bad at all on paper, but to get that number, I was carrying 3 separate mortgages, 3 insurance policies, and 3 sets of property taxes, plus every dollar of that debt sat against my own personal credit. When I ran the same math on a controlled property instead, one I lease from an owner and then sublease fully furnished, the net per door landed in that same range, sometimes slightly better, because there's no mortgage payment eating into the spread every month. Same income category, similar dollar range, a fraction of the financial exposure sitting behind it, and none of it tied to my personal name on a mortgage document. Part of why I'm doing this now, and not 2 years ago, comes down to what's actually happening in this market. Corporate housing has grown into a real multi-billion-dollar industry, expanding at a steady pace year over year, while short-term rental regulation keeps tightening in city after city. That's not a coincidence. Investors are being pushed out of the nightly rental model at the same time serious demand for furnished month-plus housing keeps climbing, from relocating employees to remote workers to traveling professionals. Timing a business around a real structural shift like that matters as much as the business model itself, because the same strategy attempted 5 years too early or 5 years too late can produce completely different results, no matter how sound the underlying math is. At a basic level, here's the structure. I sign an agreement with the person who already owns the building. I pay them a fixed monthly rent, exactly like any tenant would pay. But that agreement also gives me the explicit right to sublease the unit, fully furnished, to a third party, in this case, a company housing an employee. The spread between what I pay the owner and what the company pays me is the profit. No mortgage, no down payment required up front, no personal credit exposure if a single deal goes badly, because the liability sits inside the business entity, not against my own personal name. I want to be completely straight with you about the real cost of this model, because there's one, and I'm not going to gloss over it just because the upside sounds appealing. When you own a property, you can refinance it later. You can sell it for appreciation. You can borrow against the equity you slowly build over the years. When you control a property through a lease instead, none of that exists for me at all. If the market shifts and the owner decides not to renew the agreement, I lose that unit completely, with zero ownership claim to fall back on and nothing to show for the time I put into it. This model trades long-term wealth building for short-term speed, lower risk, and faster scale. That is a real permanent trade-off, not a footnote I'm mentioning just to sound balanced on camera. There is a second risk here worth naming directly, separate from the ownership question. Managing one property is genuinely simple, something almost anyone can handle with a few hours a month. Managing multiple agreements with multiple different owners across multiple cities, all running at the same time, is a completely different operational problem, closer to running a small logistics company than managing a single rental. Every owner has different expectations, different maintenance response times, different renewal terms. If I do not build real systems underneath this fast enough, growing to 30 doors could just mean 30 times the chaos instead of 30 times the income. That risk is exactly why market selection and the tech stack both get their own full episodes later this season, instead of being an afterthought bolted on at the end. Getting either of those wrong early is the difference between a business that runs itself and one that quietly runs me into the ground instead. So here's the number I'm putting on the table publicly, on camera, before I know how this actually ends. 30 doors. That is the goal for this season, spread across multiple cities, using only this controlled property model. Realistically, based on how fast I can onboard a new unit once an agreement is signed, I'm expecting somewhere around 2 to 3 net new doors a month once the pipeline is fully running. I'm not going to pretend that number is guaranteed, and I'm not going to quietly change the goal later if the pace slows down partway through. I'm going to show you the real progress every episode, including if this season ends short of 30. Because the entire point was never to fake a clean result. It was to actually test whether this scales in the real world. What I actually find most interesting about this model has surprisingly little to do with real estate specifically. It's that the real barrier to entry is not money. It is the ability to negotiate a fair agreement, furnish a space well, and manage a service reliably for the people paying you. Those are the same underlying skills that make any small service business work, whether the product happens to be housing or something else entirely. That is a fundamentally different starting requirement than spending years saving up a large down payment before you can even begin. It means what I'm actually building this season looks a lot closer to starting a company from scratch than to buying an investment property, even though the underlying product being sold is a furnished rental unit. If you've ever thought about starting some kind of service business but felt priced out by the capital required, this is worth watching even if you never touch real estate specifically, because the mechanics of the decision are nearly identical. Here's what the first 90 days actually look like on paper. In plain terms, I need to pick 2 to 3 target markets using nothing but public data, since I'm not visiting any of them in person, before committing to an agreement. I need to line up funding for the first 10 units without putting up any of my own personal cash, which means structuring business credit instruments instead of touching my own savings. And I need to get the very first unit fully furnished and rented inside 30 days of signing that first agreement, because every single month it sits empty is a month of pure rent expense flowing out with zero income coming back in to offset it. Before I go any further, I want to define what success and failure actually mean this season, so nobody, including me, gets to move the goalposts later. Success looks like real positive net income across every unit I control, funded entirely through business credit rather than personal cash, with a system in place that could keep scaling past this season. Failure looks like negative cash flow, personal money quietly bleeding into the gaps to cover a shortfall, or a system so fragile that a single bad client relationship threatens to take down the entire structure. I'm setting that bar now, in this episode, specifically so I cannot quietly redefine it later if the season gets harder than I expect. I'm going to hold myself to that standard all the way to the finale, so that is exactly where this season starts. 0 properties owned, a real public commitment to 30 doors, and a business model where the entire financial risk sits inside a contract, not inside a mortgage on my personal credit. If this works the way the math suggests it should, it proves something bigger than just one business model. That you do not need capital to build real, meaningful income from real estate, only a workable agreement and the discipline to run it well. If it does not work, I'm going to show you precisely where it broke, not quietly bury the number and move on to something else. If you want to see whether this actually holds up across a full season, subscribe so you catch every real number as it comes in. Next episode, I'm walking through the exact agreement I use to control a property I do not own, section by section, including the one specific clause buried in the fine print that protects my income if the owner ever tries to cancel the arrangement early. The full breakdown is right there in the next video.